Good morning, everyone. And for me, a key word very much inspired by, I think, beginning of the week is space. And and yesterday, the silence reminded me that there is a intimate and mysterious space between experience and language. And as someone whose English is my second language, I very much appreciate that liminal space that allows me to really hope to encapsulate the meaning that I hope to communicate. And to me, I think language of expression also goes beyond nationality, but also discipline. And we have scientists and practitioners and technologists and community members, monastic, so many different practices with distinct language. I was very inspired by the translanguaging, the sense-making that happens in the hallways, in the Q&As, in the sense-making group, in the walks. So coming out of the silence, I found each one of your words land in me just a tad more softly and with more openness. So I really, really appreciated that. And as Buju framed the whole arc of the week, our movement to explore intrapersonal, interpersonal, and group level, and then now to the system level today of the characteristics and the structures of polarization and depolarization, we thought that there's also space in between those layers. And then we haven't yet touched upon those spaces, the connectors, the connective tissues between those circles, from intrapersonal to interpersonal to group and then to the whole system. And the design of today's flow, we have, we identified 3 avenues that may serve as this connecting bridge between those circles, from system to group, from systems to interpersonal, and from systems to intrapersonal. And those 3 avenues include social media as an avenue, and technology as an avenue, and then policy as another avenue. And of course, those avenues, are not exclusive and exhaustive, but we thought it's important to identify and highlight those circles don't exist in silos, they exist in relations. And it's important for us to bring awareness to their relations as well. So without further ado, Puju, is it? Oh, yes. So today, we're going to focus on the bigger systems that are at play, and then learn about the structures, the characteristics within those systems that speaks to mechanisms and characteristics of polarizations and connections. Yeah.
So I want to just name a couple of things. One is, as Shankari said, I think for some of us, silence is a cleanser. After feeling there's so much social connection and so much talking and listening and so on. For other people, silence can be very difficult. So I just want to, and I'm sure there is a huge spectrum in the middle, so I just wanted to name that. There are 2 themes that Ikai and I and Shankari and others on the PPC and Eve have been discussing that are emerging. One is this, the knowing through experience in one end of the continuum, and knowing through third person, through science, first person, third person. And how do we bridge them? Those two ways of knowing which is the very, I mean, SRI deliberately brings people together through both levels of analysis. So that theme is emergent, and the more we can use that as future initiatives, the better. The second theme that has come up is typically Mind and Life and SRI takes an individual intrapersonal going upwards. How do we create better redesign culture or redesign systems, and then so that we can have greater social connection and less polarization, is the second theme. How do we redesign something more macro level? So that's the other theme I just want to name, and I know there's a emergent group of people who are really interested in that. So I think that might become a future initiative. I think that's it.
Okay, all right, thank you, Buju. So without further ado, it's a very, very great honor to introduce the professor from the university that I come from, Dr. Jay Van Bavel from New York University. Jay is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University and an affiliate at the Stern School of Business in Management and Organizations, professor at Norwegian School of Economics, and director of the Center of Conflict and Cooperation. He's also associate editor of proceedings of the National Academy of Science, Nexus. And Jay completed his PhD at the University of Toronto and a postdoctoral fellow at Ohio State University. And Jay studies how collective concerns, group identities, moral values, and political beliefs shape the mind, brain, and behavior. And his work addresses issues of group identity, social motivation, intergroup conflict, polarization, cooperation, beliefs and misinformation, moral judgment and decision-making, social media, and public health using a wide variety of methods. And he has published over 150 academic papers, including Science, Nature, PNAS, and as a highly cited researcher in the top 1% researchers worldwide. His work has also been cited in the US Supreme Court, Senate, and he has consulted with the White House, United Nations, European Union, and World Health Organizations. Without further ado, welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is on, yeah. Okay, thank you for the very warm introduction. It is an incredible honor to be here. I've been following the work of the Mind and Life Institute for many years, and I will say we've got a recent grant for them that is funding work that I'm doing with my postdoc. Remy, where are you? There in the front row. Remy is a 4-time attendee of this event. Spent his winter break going to India to see the Dalai Lama speak. And he regularly brings his friends, and I say that in a deeper way than colleagues, that he has met at the Mind and Life Institute to our lab. And they come to New York and stay with him, so that's the key to coming and visiting us. And I told him, we went for a walk yesterday, and I said, I really now understand how you've developed such deep relationships with all of these people that you've met at these Mind and Life events, because the way that you connect with people here is very different than a traditional conference. And so it's really wonderful to be part of that and see that. And also, as I said, I've seen the effects of it in my own lab. So today, what I want to talk about is the impact of identity, which I think is a very basic aspect of human nature. We evolved in small groups, and I really think that the key to our survival as a species is our ability to cooperate. Humans are fairly weak creatures. We can't fly away from predators. We don't have camouflage or poison or sharp teeth and fangs. Our capacity for success is really our ability to communicate with one another and work together, not only to fight off predators, but to build the incredible institutions and technology that we have in the world today. Now, what I also want to talk about is that you've taken these very basic aspects of human psychology that have been with us for hundreds of thousands of years and dropped them into a modern universe with very powerful, almost godlike technology. And a a lot of this technology is evolving at such a rapid speed and with little consideration for what it's doing to us as individuals or as society. And so this is something that my lab has been studying for the last decade, is how is it impacting us? And then once we understand that, maybe we can have like a more informed conversation about, if we're gonna have this technology, what do we want it to do? How do we want to design it in ways that foster connection, cooperation, collaboration, rather than foster loneliness and disconnection and polarization? I will also say, Remy encouraged me. I brought about 6 or 7 copies of my book. They're out by Buju's book in the lobby if you want to pick up one. All of our papers are available for free as PDFs to download from my website or the Center for Conflict and Cooperation website at NYU. Okay. As I've been saying this, you might have noticed that there's a picture in the background here. Does anybody recognize this photo? It's a very famous photo. Shankari's the only one who recognizes it. Okay. This is Jesse Owens. He was arguably the most famous track athlete in American history. This is him in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, where he won multiple gold medals in dominant fashion. But as I said, this is 1936 in Berlin. This was basically the moment where Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were trying to reveal the supremacy of their ideology, of Nazi ideology. And this is Jesse Owens winning the gold medal, and you can see everybody is giving the Nazi salute to Adolf Hitler. So this is also a very famous photo, probably more famous, and this was seen as a rebuke, a repudiation of that really hateful ideology at the time, that Jesse Owens kind of embodied a critique of it. Now, the story I'm going to tell, and this is the opening story of my book, is about Jesse Owens' shoes. Because it turns out there's a lesson there about how discrimination begins. So these are his famous cleats. They are now in a museum. They're kind of a symbol of this important moment of history. And as I found out when I was doing research for my book, his shoes were created by 2 cobblers in Germany. And they lived in the small town in southern Germany of Herzogenaurach. I'm never going to pronounce that right. And the town, as I learned, was known as the town of bent necks, because everybody in that town for decades and decades would walk around with a bent neck staring at everybody's shoes. Now, no one's wearing shoes in this room, but if you were wearing shoes in this small town, people would use that as the basis of determining if you're an in-group or out-group member and discriminating against you. Because what happened during the war is that the 2 brothers who were these cobblers who created these shoes started a rivalry. There's a lot of legends about why this happened that led them to break up and create 2 different shoe manufacturing companies on opposite ends of the town. And there was a river that cut through the middle of the town. And if you were on one side of the river, you were loyal to one shoe company. If you were on the other side of the river, you were loyal to the other shoe company. And this meant if you were wearing the wrong shoes in the wrong part of town, you would get kicked out of restaurants or bars. You weren't allowed to date or marry someone who was wearing the wrong shoes. And so it was a form of explicit discrimination. By the way, this is the town of Bent Necks. And this rivalry that divided the town lasted past the death of the 2 brothers. And I say past the death because each brother was buried in the town cemetery and insisted on being buried in the opposite corners of the cemetery. So this is a rivalry that lasted to eternity for the 2 of them. Although once they died, things started to de-escalate. The one brother was Rudy, and the other brother was Adi. Adi was the guy who this is the town of Bent Necks. It's very beautiful. Adi was the guy who founded Adidas. So some of you might be wearing Adidas shoes, say. Rudy was the guy who founded Puma. So these ended up being 2 of the most popular and successful shoe manufacturing companies in the world, which is kind of a funny side story. But what was interesting to me psychologically is, why did these residents of this small town, who shared almost everything in common, they had the same ethnicity, the same nationality, the same religious belief system, the same socioeconomic status, they almost all worked in the exact same industry, doing the exact same job, same language, all of these things that we think of as our core to dividing groups and fostering discrimination were almost completely absent. And yet there was this multi-decades long, over half a century long, conflict that divided the town. And like I said, led to who you could date or marry or be friends with. And so the research on this that really emerged to kind of explain this came out in 1970 and 1971 by researchers at the University of Bristol in England who basically tried to figure out what causes discrimination. And so they decided to create a control condition. They thought they would do something similar to what chemists do when they control an environment and then put two compounds in and see how they interact. And so they stripped away all the factors that they thought were involved in conflict. Again, these differences in belief system, history of discrimination, symbols of identity, stereotypes, even social interactions. And they basically flipped a coin and put people in part of two groups. And they were expecting there's going to be no discrimination there. And then we're going to slowly add in each of these variables, one after another, in a very careful, rigorous, scientific way to find out what causes discrimination. And they were shocked, by all accounts, to find out you don't need any of those things to cause discrimination. Simply being part of a group, being categorized as part of a group, even on a silly dimension, by the flip of a coin or by the number of dots that you estimate on a screen, or by the abstract art that you like, is sufficient to get you to identify with that group and discriminate against people who disagree with you or come from a different group. And they would allocate more money to their own group over the other group repeatedly. And I have now replicated this study myself in multiple countries. It is super robust. And what it suggests is that even in these most minimal cases, you can generate discrimination. And so this is really the roots of intergroup conflict and polarization. And it looks like this. You take somebody and you flip a coin and put them in part of a group of strangers, of people they don't even know. And within minutes, they start to identify as those people are part of my group and people who got assigned to the other group are part of an outgroup. And that is all it really takes. So merely joining a group is sufficient to create discrimination, and it's usually via in-group favoritism. So this is allocating more to your own group. You don't really see outgroup hate until you layer in the other factors, like violence, history of conflict, zero-sum fights over resources. Those escalate this to basically turn into outgroup violence and hatred as well. But this is kind of often the first step. My research when I started in graduate school was basically to try to figure out, okay, this is driving discrimination, but maybe this can also be a tool to get rid of discrimination. So at the time, there was a lot of research led by Buju and many others looking at implicit biases, these biases that happen very automatically within a few hundred milliseconds of seeing somebody who's different than you. People have preferences for members of their own race, their own religiosity. And what we found is that merely assigning people to a group by a flip of a coin, and this was one of our studies, this case we just called them the Tigers or the Lions, and we put people on mixed race groups. What we would find over and over again is that people felt positive to members of their own group, regardless of their race. They liked them more, they wanted to be friends with them more, they had more positive attitudes, their automatic attitudes that were happening rapidly were changing. We even found that their brain activity changed, and it was tracking who's with me and against me in this particular moment, not through these historical forms of stereotyping and discrimination. It was tracking us versus them in terms of these minimal groups. And so what this suggests is that psychologically, we have the capacity to identify very quickly with people who feel like they're part of our group in this moment. And this shifts back. There was a great paper on this with all of these interventions on implicit bias. And what they found is some of these interventions work quite well, but often within even a day, these kind of shift back into our old forms of discrimination. In part because we go back out into the world and there's all these signals in the media and our social environments that signal who's with us and who's against us. And so, but they can shift very quickly. So it suggests that identity is very flexible in this way. This is a quote by John Turner, one of the creators of social identity theory. He had this great quote that I love. One of my students created a poster of this and put it in my office. He wrote that all cognition is social cognition. And what he meant is that since our sense of self is fluid and changes depending on the environments we're in, that drives how we think. And if you change the situation and you activate a different sense of self, it's going to change what you pay attention to, who you like, what motivates you. And we have found this over and over again. As I said, we found that even in these minimal groups, Being part of a new identity shapes your automatic reactions to people, who you like and who you dislike, and this can override racial bias. We have found that it shapes your memory. If I show you faces, people have better memory for members of their in-group over an out-group. And this can override racial biases in face memory as well. We have found it with attention. So where you look is guided by who's a part of your group and where they're looking. And so even how you orient yourself in a room, where you visually pay attention to, and what you look at when you're looking at somebody, research has found that you're more willing to look at the eyes of people who are part of your in-group. And that's really critical to starting to see them as human and thinking about them as an individual, not just as an interchangeable part of a group. It also shapes mind perception. So we show people faces, and the point at which they start to see a mind in the face emerges faster if it's a member of their own group. And this is really core to things like empathy and perspective taking, that you have to see someone as having a mind if you're going to care about what's in their mind and how they're feeling and reacting in situations. And again, identity determines this as well. And so across this whole cascade of aspects of our cognition, of how we think, including very basic aspects of cognition, identity is a really powerful driver of these. We wrote a paper, this was by my former PhD student, Jenny Shao, and the argument we made is that identity operates like a set of glasses. So you can take your glasses on or off, and it changes kind of how you see the world. If you have sunglasses, it can change the hue and tone and color of what you're looking at. And so we thought of identity as much like this. When you are activated different identity in a person, it slightly changes how they're looking at the world in pretty profound ways. This paper we had also reviewed, it affects things like what we smell. So we had a study in Switzerland, and when you activate the Swiss identity in people who are from Switzerland, they smell chocolate as more intense because chocolate is a really key part of their national identity. I know this because I've had Swiss students and postdocs visit my lab, and they always give me a chocolate, Swiss chocolates as a gift. And it changes, so it changes where we attend. It changes what we smell. Research suggests that it might also change how we taste things. And so a lot of our senses and perceptions are guided by our identities that are important to us. When they become active, they change how we interpret the world. Now, I moved from Canada to the United States in 2006, and I was in Ohio, which was at the time the biggest swing state in the country. So all the presidential candidates were coming through, giving talks in the state near the university I was for my postdoc. And I started to realize the dynamics of American politics reminded me a lot of the research I was doing in the lab. I became very interested in polarization in a political context. And this, if you have not seen this is just in America. This is the degree to which Republicans have become more ideologically conservative and Democrats have become more ideologically liberal. And what you see is it almost looks like two cells pulling apart, where there used to be a lot more overlap between people's belief systems and their party identity, and they've really sorted. There's evidence that people have sorted geographically. They've moved to cities and regions and counties where people share their identities. If you look at voting in Congress, it used to be the case that people actually cooperated, and there was a lot of bills and legislation and policy that was bipartisan. Almost none of that happens anymore. There's even a great study where they had videotapes of people walking around Congress, and they no longer walk near somebody who's not part of the same party. So they're not even having physical interactions in the same way that we will here as we move around the space together. So I wrote this paper with some political scientists and sociologists, and what we suggest, at least in America, is that polarization has now tipped into something slightly different, that it has this kind of cocktail of othering, that you see somebody who's different than you as fundamentally different than you in some essential way. You avoid them. That's why you move to a different place, so you don't want to be near them. Or you switch your dentist because you don't want that person with different political beliefs in your mouth. There's evidence of that. And moralization. So it's no longer that people disagree with me, but they're fundamentally evil. Is the way that we think. And once we moralize things, this is something I also study, we find that once you moralize something, you stop seeing shades of gray, and you really start to see things in black or white. That it is good or evil, and the other thing that happens when you moralize is that you think everybody should agree with you. And so that leaves no room for open-mindedness or conversation or compromise or finding any common ground. And so this is really the psychology of a lot of people who are hyper-partisan in the United States. You might think, and when I talk about polarization to some people, they're like, it's okay that I hate this other group. Polarization's not so bad. You see academics talk like this sometimes, because they deserve it, or because they've done something really bad. So it's okay if I see them as bad. But I will say the thing is, when we look through the literature, there's reasons to care about polarization anyways. For example, when people are polarized, they will vote for a leader who they don't like, who they think is corrupt or a bad person, simply to stop the other side from getting power. And so you lose the ability of regular voters to be open-minded to potentially voting because something bad has happened in their party. They will defend their party no matter what. And so that can lead to bad, corrupt leaders taking power. The other thing it does is it means you're no longer willing to cooperate, even when you both agree on something. So even if there's a policy that you both think would be better for everybody in the country, you refuse to cooperate because the people you'd have to cooperate with are fundamentally evil. And so that stops you from doing something even if you think it would be good for you or for the citizens of the country. And so there's lots of ways in which we all suffer under these circumstances. Another big one that I study is health, that it means we follow radically different health guidelines. And so it's really hard for experts or doctors to give people advice if they fundamentally don't trust them because of their politics. So this has all kinds of consequences for all of us. So, and if you track this over the last 45 years, 50 years, what you see is that it used to be the case that people liked their political party, but now what's driving most of politics is the amount of hatred they have for the other party. So it started at in-group favoritism, and now it's really out-group derogation. And now out-group derogation is stronger than in-group favoritism. It's really what's driving a lot of people's political behavior, political decisions. Okay, so how is this impacting us? As I said, it shapes our cognition. So if you're in an environment where there's a clear signal of who's us and who's them, what it does is it shapes how we interpret the world. So I have a paper on how identity shapes our beliefs, and in particular in a political domain. And here's one of the first examples of it that we talked about in our paper. This was Donald Trump's 2016 inauguration, where he claimed he had the biggest crowd in the history of presidential inaugurations. And then the very first press conference, he had his press secretary go to the entire nation and say his crowd was larger. And of course, there were pictures of this. I showed this to my daughter, who was about 4 years old at the time. It's easy for her to see which of these pictures has a larger crowd. It's the one on the right here. That was from Barack Obama's inauguration, and the left is from Trump's. And it's easy to see one is full and one is less full, but he insisted, and his administration insisted that wasn't true. And there were studies quickly from political scientists that found that, nevertheless, a lot of his supporters would look at that photo and agree that his crowd was larger. And so how do you get these types of beliefs? It's a mix of two things. Part of it is what's called partisan cheerleading. Even if you really privately don't think it, you say it as a way of signaling loyalty. So you will agree with something you know is not true. And there's a long history of that in social psychology. But in some cases, things are ambiguous. And I will say quickly, shortly after this, we saw this with COVID. I have several papers studying this. And COVID, none of us knew how risky it was going to be. None of us really knew how to react to it. And so when Donald Trump is saying it's going to disappear one day, it's like a miracle, you don't have to worry about it or let it control your life, even after he caught it himself. People who trust him are going to believe that. And this is what we found in there's surveys in every state, all 50 states. What determined your belief about the risk of COVID, early on especially, was simply what your party affiliation was. So it really didn't have to do what experts were saying, or even the local risk, if it was spreading in your neighborhood. Didn't matter very much at all. What mattered far more is simply what party you were part of, because that determined who you listened to and what you believed. And you place more weight and valued the beliefs and statements of people you trust. And so this is another case where polarization is dangerous. In this case, it's particularly dangerous because this is a highly transmissible disease. So even if your neighbor doesn't agree with you politically, if they're taking actions that get them infected, you're more likely to get infected, even if you disagree with them. And so And then, of course, he posted this on social media to 88 million people. You know, don't worry about it. Don't let it control your life. Okay, now I'm kind of picking on Trump and his supporters, but let me tell you, I ran studies with Democrats and Republicans, and we showed them different kinds of fake news. And these are like some classic examples of fake news during the 2016 election. One was Hillary Clinton wore a secret earpiece during debate, which was, of course, made up. So that made Hillary Clinton look bad, the Democrats look bad. The other one on the other side is Donald Trump enacts a one-child law for minorities. That was untrue. One thing that's interesting here is notice that both those came from Empire News. So some news sites are sharing misinformation about both sides just because people click on it and share it. It drives engagement, so they make money. So they don't care who they're lying about. It's profitable for them. And so when we show people these, we actually found that Democrats and Republicans, regular citizens, are equally likely to believe news when it affirms their group, makes them feel better about their group, even if it's untrue. We also created fake news in the lab that was identical in every dimension. We found the same effect. And so it's not that one party is more likely than the other party to believe misinformation. They both are. It's really just if one leader or the other sharing it, people who identify with that leader will believe it. We did find a difference, however, in that Republicans are more willing to share news that aligned with their identity than Democrats. And so this might lead to differences in how the news spreads. And we think this is about norms. Your identity shapes what you believe, and that seems to be pretty equal across the left and right. But if there's a norm where your leader is sharing a lot of misinformation or hyper-partisan news, you feel more comfortable sharing it. It's a way of signaling your loyalty and identity. And so it reminded me a lot of, like, there's lots of classic research. This is from one of my favorite shows, X-Files. I want to believe. Part of this comes from a desire, a motivation, to want to believe things that align with your identity. And there's a long history of this in psychology. The most famous study on this was from Leon Festinger, who came up with cognitive dissonance theory. And he joined a cult that predicted basically a cataclysmic or devastating flood that was going to kill humanity, and that an alien ship was going to come down and save people on midnight of a specific day. And so him and his research team joined the cult, acted like they were members, and were in the room on midnight when the alien ship was supposed to come and save them. And they wanted to see what happens to their beliefs when they're proven wrong. And so all these people gave away their possessions, left their homes, joined the cult. The clock struck midnight, no alien ship came. And he thought, okay, is this a moment where you give up this belief system? But people were so deeply identified that they immediately realized, oh, that clock must be slow. There's another clock in the other room. Or that clock must be fast. The other clock in the other room must be right. So they move to the other room. That clock strikes midnight. Still no alien ship. They sit there in silence. Some people are crying. And then eventually the leader goes into another room and said, I got a message from the aliens. And our beliefs have been so strong that they've saved humanity. And so then people doubled down on their beliefs and proselytized it. They went into the news and shared it in a way they hadn't even before. And so again, this is a direct contradiction of one of their deepest held beliefs. And instead of updating their belief and being, okay, maybe I was wrong, that was a bit embarrassing, but it was worth a shot, they doubled down and now started to spread it. And so this is something that we see over and over again against lots of different types of identities. And this book talks about a long history of different communities have had beliefs challenged, and instead of updating their beliefs, double down on them. And in the book, they point to a few factors that predict when people cling to beliefs, even when they're false. The first one is if you're really strongly committed to the belief in the first place. That seems pretty obvious. But the one that's most interesting from a social, psychological perspective is it's really easy to cling to a false belief when your community all believes it too. It's really actually hard to abandon a belief when everybody around you is still clinging to it. So it's the social support, the social community, that either determines whether you cling to your belief or update it. So speaking of social communities and false beliefs, we're now in the era of massive technology that spreads them rapidly. This was a paper from Science magazine, and they found that fake news spread faster than true news on Twitter, and it was thanks to people, not bots. And tweets containing falsehoods were 70% more likely to be reshared than truthful tweets. So in other words, misinformation is spreading virally because it drives engagement. And if you dug into the paper, there was two factors that predicted this. The first was if the news was political, because a lot of the news misinformation that's spreading is due to identity and polarization. That turns out to be a real vector for spreading misinformation for the reasons I've explained. And the other one was if it's emotional, if it activates us emotionally. So we've been studying this, and the way I've been thinking about the impact of technology is very similar to this viral video I saw. This is Sugriva, a chimpanzee. In the wild, chimpanzees can only learn 22 tools that are known to researchers. But look at Sugriva seamlessly use Instagram. So this is a species, a primate that uses like a twig to poke it into a termite hole. Can easily use this. And look at what Sugriva's looking at. That's a picture of a snake. It grabs attention. It drives engagement. Sugriva then goes and looks at pictures of her friends. And so she's going to the things that are emotionally evocative, a lot like us. And this aligned a lot with one of my favorite quotes from evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson. And he said, the real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, like our primate ancestors, that haven't really changed in a long, long time. We have medieval institutions that are not well equipped for designing policies to deal with this technology. And the technology has become godlike. So, and he said it's now terrifically dangerous and it's approaching a point of crisis overall. He was talking about nuclear warfare. But whenever I think about technology like social media and artificial intelligence, I feel like this quote resonates really powerfully to what we see when we study it. We see humans use it in ways that our emotions get exploited, our institutions are not up to the task, and the technology just gets faster and more powerful. So to give you a sense of the godlike scale of this technology, the average social media user scrolls through about 300 feet of news feed a day. So I see all the people with phones, that's about 6 inches, means you scroll through that 600 times a day, if you're an average person. That's the height of the Statue of Liberty. That's why I have her there. That's according to a vice president at Facebook, by the way. I need to update this slide. There's now over 5.5 billion people on social media. Not 5 billion, 5.5 billion. And they're scrolling through 300 feet of news feed a day. And so this is the attention economy. By the way, the average user is going to be on social media for 2.5 hours a day, which is 5.7 years of your life will be spent doom scrolling. If you're young, if you're in Gen Z, it's closer to 10 years of your life. Imagine that, 10 years of your entire life just curled up in the fetal position like this. And I'm not immune to it. I'm not judging you. The technology is really compelling. I had a conversation at breakfast this morning. We were talking about the Day of Silence. And several people, it was really enlightening to me because it was the first time I'm able to actually sit down and think about what my breakfast routine is, because several people of us at our table watch YouTube videos alone for their entire breakfast every day. And 40% of 2-year-olds in America have an iPad now. 2-year-olds. So I assume this is only going to get much worse as the technology scales, right? And it's becoming more and more, I don't want to use addictive because it's controversial among clinical psychologists, but addicting in a behavioral sense. People can't seem to stop it. And so I wanted to ask you, and maybe this might not apply during our Day of Silence, but in a normal day, how many check your phone when you first wake up? Look around the room. It's about 75% of the people. How many people check it right before you fall asleep? Last thing. Look around the room. It's about half of you. So that means probably about half of you, a third of you. It kind of bookends your entire conscious experience each day. So only when you're asleep is the only time you're free from this technology. And we're trying to understand how it's impacting us. So it allows for these cascades of our emotions, and in particular, we're finding negative emotions. It exploits them, and also it's a way of signaling solidarity if we share a feeling of outrage. Outrage is also a really powerful emotion because it activates us to do something, even if we don't want to. And so we've been trying to find out how this spreads, and it spreads through things like motivation. We want to signal our identity. We want to be good group members, and the companies are kind of doing this in an attention economy. But I think of social media a lot like a restaurant in New York City. You go there, you're talking to people, but the table next to you is kind of loud and the table behind you is kind of loud, so you have to speak up louder. And now you're kind of shouting. And now you're shouting, so they now have to shout even louder so that they can be heard at their table. And now you basically have to be screaming at your table. And this is social media. If you want to be heard, as people scroll through those 300 feet of newsfeed, you want to pop out and grab their attention so they don't just scroll by. You have to shout louder and louder. You have to say more and more outrageous things. And now, the design of this technology and the algorithms, that's what they're going to do. They're going to amplify the things that grab everybody's attention, which turn out to often be really hostile, negative, outrageous things. And so all of these things are basic psychology, the design and algorithms of these platforms, and the way they grab our attention are guiding our behavior. Now, I don't want to say that outrage is all bad. I think this is really important. Like, here's an example I would argue that was quite useful for society. The Me Too movement was an online hashtag that spread around the world, really within 12 hours of, as was being discussed by celebrities that were famous with big reach. You can see that it reached all of these countries almost instantly. And this changed institutions. I know a lot of academics who were fired for sexual harassment, probably should have been fired decades before, but there wasn't the outward expressions against them and the institutional motivation to do something. And so this changed people in academia and institutions. It changed Hollywood. It changed mainstream media. It had all of these impacts. But what we're finding is that the more people are online, the more they're exposed to outrage. So this is work by Molly Crockett, and this is a decade old. I suspect it's even bigger effect now. But she said the main place people learn about morality or immorality is online. They learn about way more immorality online than in person or print, TV, and radio combined. So the mainstream media, we talk a lot about it. It has a really tiny effect on your understanding of morality. And in particular, your understanding of immorality. That's the top bar there. And so what emotion are you having when you're online? Well, what she found is that since you're exposed to so much immorality, your main emotion is moral outrage. You're experiencing way more moral outrage online than you are in person or through other forms of media. And so this is where driving a lot of our feelings of outrage. We have studied this. This is a study we ran of 560,000 people on hot-button political issues like gun control, same-sex marriage when it was up for Supreme Court debate, climate change. And what we found over and over again in every study we ran is that when people are using moral emotional language, their messages are going viral. For every moral emotional word you used in a post, it was 20% more likely to be shared. So that means if you use 5 words like this, you say, I'm outraged, this makes me hate that group, I feel so much contempt. You put 5 words like that in, it doubles the chances that it spreads. And we found that politicians are using this, and when they're using it, it's really going viral. This is an analysis of almost 5 million posts from 7 labs around the world, including ours. And this is a meta-analysis. This is very robust. We found this across, and other labs have found this on topic after topic after topic. In this, if you follow meta-analyses, in this meta-analysis, the bigger the study, with the better the methods, the bigger the effect, which is the opposite of most meta-analyses, which means this is a really strong, robust finding. But when people are using this language, we looked at who was engaging with them. And what we found is it created echo chambers, or polarization. When you use this language, you get the positive reinforcement because it is going viral. But what you don't realize is the only people who are sharing it are people who already agree with you. People who disagree with you are disengaging with you. And we have run experiments in the lab where we just change 1 or 2 words in a post. When people are talking about an issue, even a sensitive issue, the moment they use that language, they are seen as hyper-partisan. So it works like a bat signal. You send out into the sky to signal who you are. But if people don't agree with you, they suddenly see you as closed-minded, and they are less willing to have a conversation with you to talk about it. So in other words, it cuts you off from the opportunities of persuasion. So I don't want to say it's good or bad, it's both. It can activate people like you, activate your base, but it alienates people who differ from you. So you have no capacity to persuade. Okay, so now we've created a dictionary of the words that are most polarizing. You can read this paper. And what we found is that foreign agencies are using them more and more and more. So this was analysis of Russian troll farms that interfere in American elections, but also they interfere all over the world in democratic elections. When we analyze their language on social media, they're using polarizing words more and more and more. They're finding it's very effective at dividing people and causing chaos in democratic countries and institutions. We have another study. This was by a postdoc of mine, Steve Ratche. We found that the single best thing for getting a message to spread online is just really going full force and just sharing negative information about an outgroup. We found that each term referring to a political outgroup, almost all of which were negative, increased the odds of a social media post being shared by 67%. So this is even more powerful than moral outrage, just outgroup negativity. When we looked at on Facebook data of what emotion was triggered by this, we found two emotions were activated by negative stories about outgroups. The laughing emoji, which is called Schadenfreude, where you're laughing at someone else's misfortune. And even stronger than that was the anger emoji. It's triggering anger in people. And at the same time, we learned from a whistleblower at Facebook that if someone posts something on your Facebook and you click the anger emoji, they would put it in 5 times as many people's news feeds, as opposed to if you just hit the thumb up button. So that's called algorithmic amplification. That is a design choice by the company to spread content that is uniquely engaging to drive your anger. And so they make money from this. They do it because it's profitable. But for us, it just fuels conflict because the types of posts that drive anger are outgroup negativity. And then people click on it with the anger emoji, and then it gets amplified by algorithms. So that's the full MAD model right there. And I want to argue that this has had huge consequences. Arguably the biggest threat to American democracy in the last decade, or probably last century, was the attempt to overthrow the election results in 2020. All these people who looked like they were kind of internet avatars came to life and violently tried to overthrow the election. The New York Times newspaper contacted us and said, we want to analyze what members of Congress were thinking as in the lead up to this. And they got our polarization dictionary. And what they found over a dozen years is that members of Congress, the US Congress, as they tracked them for over a decade, were using more and more of the polarizing language. And then around 2020, right before this attempt to overthrow the election, that language skyrocketed. Now, they broke the Republican Party into 2 groups. On the night after this insurrection, after they cleared all these people out, they had a vote to certify the election. And about half the Republicans voted to certify the election with the Democrats. They voted to accept the results of the Democratic vote, and half did not. Now, the half did not, we'll call them objectors. They objected to the Democratic outcome of the election. That was these people. If you tracked them, they were the people who were the most hyper-polarized in their rhetoric online. So this type of rhetoric online is a really good predictor of anti-democratic behavior in the highest stakes possible setting in the real world. And so I'm going to end on a positive note and then go to questions in about a minute. I'm going to say, okay, well, what can we do about this? I'm going to say, I didn't have time for all the studies, but a new study we found is if you just simply unfollow the most hyper-polarizing accounts on social media, that helps a lot. People become 24% less polarized if they just unfollow 10 extreme accounts. But not only that, once they unfollow them, they prefer it. Most people keep unfollowing them for up to a year. And so the effects last we found up to 11 months. So you can have some control over your own newsfeed that way. We found if you replace it with uplifting social media accounts, like science accounts, that like the Discovery Channel or Scientific American, who show you pictures of like black holes and poison dart frogs in the Amazon, the emotion that triggers in people is awe. People mentioned Dacher Keltner's work yesterday. I think Eve mentioned it during her session. People experience awe instead on social media, and they feel more positive and less polarized. So part of it is the information diet that we're consuming every day. It's imagine eating unhealthy, the example I often use is McDonald's. There's a very famous documentary, Super Size Me, where a guy ate at a McDonald's every day for a month, and he tracked how his health just collapsed. But this is what we're doing to our brains. This is our information diet. If you make a healthier information diet, you're going to notice positive effects. Now, I want to say that identities don't just divide us, they can bring us together. So there was a great example where we put this to the test. We took some lessons from my book, we have a chapter on polarization, and we turned them into a 5-minute intervention to foster a shared of common identity among Americans and remind them that they share norms of democracy and supporting one another historically. And we submitted it to this, what's called the Saving Democracy Challenge. They had 252 submissions from around the world, and this team at Stanford then picked the top 25 submissions and gave them to 32,000 Americans from every walk of life, representative sample. And they looked at it, what can reduce partisan animosity and increase support for democracy? And we were quite anxious, but our intervention from our lab got selected. And we were like, okay, this is going to see whether this actually works, because someone else is going to run this study. And it was the third most effective. And the effects lasted for several weeks. As I told you, a lot of effects go away within 24 hours in psychology. These lasted for 2 weeks. And the effect size was actually quite large. So reminding people they have a shared identity can reduce partisan animosity and increase support for democracy and persist. So these things do work. I just want to briefly say, what are the 2 things that work better than ours? One was actually this beer commercial from Heineken. This researchers just submitted this commercial, and it just shows people from different backgrounds building something together. They built a bar, and they had a positive experience and got to know each other as humans first, and then they revealed they had very different politics and said, are you willing to discuss it? And they just all, who knows how heavily it was edited, but everybody's like, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. And that's called positive intergroup contact. That's one of, I think, the most classic ways of reducing prejudice, but you can use it in this context too. And the other one was revealing that the media misrepresents us. And once people feel seen, they realize, my group has been misrepresented in the media or social media, they calm down and relax a bit, and they're more willing to interact with somebody else. So those are 3 things you can do that actually work very effectively. I will notice some things backfired. The bottom 4 things were worse than a control condition. So that's why we have to do these studies, because some things we're coming up with, what we think in advance might be effective, are often sometimes ineffective. So I'll end there. My main points are we contain a multitude of identities. I'm just talking about a few types. And they're flexible. We can shift identities. We can make our identities more inclusive, our moral circles broader. And once we do, these identities shape our beliefs and our behavior and even how we attend to and see the world. But I also want to say social identities can lead us astray. So we have to think carefully not just about creating groups, but creating groups with good norms, where we support one another and help one another, not where we're discriminatory. And in this way, this is how identities can help us connect to others, bridge divides, and there's lots of evidence that in moments of crisis and threat, it can create solidarity where people help others in distress, even complete strangers. So a lot of the research on identity ignores the positive aspects. Okay, I'm happy to take questions, and if you want any of the papers, I also have a copy of my book out there, but all the papers are free here, so I encourage you to read them or send me any questions you have. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jay, and we'll open up for questions.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think the book, Why We're Polarized, uses a lot of your research. My name is Zoe Kwok, and I'm from Philadelphia, building social ventures to try to translate a lot of this research into the real world.
Wonderful.
And so my question to you, this moral outrage issue happens because a lot of what's happening, it's not neutral. It is emotionally activating. And Ezra Klein points out that the Republican Party has become more and more extreme and sees less diverse news sources. It's all Fox News and Breitbart, whereas liberals, Democrats tend to have larger or more diverse news sources and tend to, because it's a diverse coalition, have to hear many voices and build the capacity to hold space for those voices. Whereas the Republican Party is much more homogenous and benefits from becoming more extreme in its views, isolating people, and becoming more like a cult and punishing disloyalty, punishing people who have bipartisan behavior. And so it's almost like a rigged playing field where if we continue to be kind and listen to each other, that group preserves power and continues to gerrymander and rig the system even more to make our voices count less, to make our votes count less, to invalidate or make people invisible, to put them in detention centers, to take away their votes. So it's not neutral, right? So how do these interventions help us bring people who are being pushed into a cult, who live in these echo chambers, see us as human beings instead of trying to keep us from interacting with them?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question. I'll say a couple things. The first thing, it's really important to separate the extremism of politicians or elites from regular citizens. So one thing that's a common misperception, the average Republican is not as extreme as people think. I mean the average voter. So you have to separate the cases that the average member of Congress and Republican, the Republican Party in particular, is far more extreme than the average constituent in their district. So you first have to separate the positions of political elites from regular citizens. And there's interventions that do that. And what they do is when they reveal that your perception, and the problem is that our perceptions of the average voter get distorted by their elites. And so we think the average voter is way more extreme than they are. And once you reveal this to people, they actually becomes grounds for conversation, and it can de-escalate their hostility. And I do want to say, like, in terms of seeing people as human, this was one of the things that this intervention did, is it reduced basically just disdain or hatred for the average person of that party. And so that's one of the reasons why I think these interventions actually useful, is if you're going to get people to see you and your group as human, you have to depolarize them. And it helps if they realize that the average person in your group is not as extreme as they are, because that basically what's happening is on social media and the mainstream media, Fox News is very bad for this, is it they engage in, they'll pull out the most extreme examples and hold them up as if they're representative of an entire group, and that fuels animosity, and that's a choice that they do. So it's really important to show the diversity of perspectives and the nuance. Most people actually are not very extreme politically. And there are a very famous book on this, that their political beliefs are actually pretty confused for most people. Their politics about economic policy are very different from their social policy beliefs. So I think it's just understanding people are very diverse. You should not stereotype people, whether we're talking about politics or race or religion or ethnicity, because often it misrepresents them. Now, the other issue you get to is structural and systems. Things like gerrymandering are attacks on democratic rights. They cut entire groups, usually in America, the history of African Americans from voting. What's happening is Republicans are gerrymandering. It's a way of cheating to win the House. And then Democrats are doing the same thing. Like in California, they're gerrymandering back. And then what's going to happen at the end of this is it's going to create a system that has no democratic flexibility. Almost no districts are going to matter anymore. And so it just takes away voice from everybody in the long run. In the short run, it's a form of cheating, but once you get retribution, so this is something why I think that it's really important for people to, I would say this is a policy issue. You have to create policies where this type of partisan gerrymandering is not permitted. How we do that is really hard. I don't want to pretend that I have answers for those things, but those are the bigger structural issues when Buju was setting up the session that we have to think about. Yeah.
It's on. Okay. So my name is Choyang. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. And especially, I found that you research about how people are creating the false belief. So that is this is my third time to SRI. So we are here talking about how contemplative practice help to our peace of mind and peace of community and peace of world. So in the past, our conversation, I saw that we are missing the root sometimes. In the contemplative practice, I got education from the Buddhist philosophy is the root of the confliction is, we can say, the false belief, misconception. In the Buddhism, we said it's ignorant. So ignorant about the reality and creating lots of misconception, false belief, and then creating the conflict. And then the core, the practice of Buddhism is transforming your way of thinking. So what to transform is what you see, what you hear, what you imagine is always in this, not this way. So you have to transform your mind from this kind of, like a facial perception. So for this is coming the false belief. So my question to you is, so you found that in the research how people are creating the false belief. But also when you study this, do you find also the solution how to break those false beliefs?
Yeah, it's a great question. How do you break false beliefs? So there are a lot of ways in which we've studied false beliefs. One is conspiracy theories and misinformation. And as I said, sometimes those are hard to challenge. I'm going to tell you the two most effective things for dealing with false beliefs. The first one was part of my prior answer, which is realizing people are misrepresented in the media and they're not more, you think they're much more extreme than the average citizen is. So I think you have to be open-minded and listen and engage with real humans to understand what their actual beliefs are, rather than just stereotyping them. And correcting those beliefs is really critical. Research finds that once you correct them, people become less hateful and polarized. However, another big thing is when we're talking about the spreading of things like misinformation online, there's a lot of evidence that things like fact checks are really good until you get to polarized content, and then they don't work very well. And so we have fact checking and content moderation and accuracy nudges, but they are very weak in polarized domains. What we found actually works for polarized content is if you were to change the design of the technology, we have a few studies on this, if you were just to add a misleading button on each social media platform so people could just click it every time they found something misleading, if it turns out if you see that other people find something misleading, you're way less likely to share it. Because we are very attentive to the social norms of our community, and that actually is more powerful than content moderators or fact checkers. And it is especially powerful when things are polarized if you think people like me find it misleading. People from my group found it misleading. That is extremely powerful. We found that as 5 times as strong as a fact check. So that is a design change that surfaces social norms that allows you to update your belief and disengage from it. So I think we need to find more ways of embedding the wisdom of crowds and revealing norms. People often, when we did a national survey, people don't like misinformation on social media. They don't like it going viral. But you need to create new design features and systems so that it stops from flowing. And the content moderation system, I think, is really important, but not doing as an effective job as it needs to be. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your fantastic work. My name is Barbara. I lead the field initiative. We focus on cultivating conditions in cities or with communities across the ecosystem and working in highly polarized environments. For example, one such example was in Romania, very low trust, highly transactional environment, post-communist, a lot of cognitive dissonance and so on. And my question is, how do you see embodied contemplative practices introducing those kind of interventions that cultivate presence, awareness, interdependence, shift the salience of social identities? Yeah. And we started introducing, because we have seen that things didn't really work, so slowly, we started introducing, we call them cultivating presence, so to make sure it was really neutral, because there were very polarized spiritual and religious orientations. And I'm curious, how do you see this can make a difference? And also, what is the existing research where this shift shows whether or not it lasts, beyond the intervention, and also where are the gaps in this research that we could perhaps collectively work on this, taking this further. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 questions. The first one is, what are contemplative practices that could be used? I will say, I'll connect you to Remy. He's sitting right there. This is what he's been researching for the last 5 or 6 years, is things like loving kindness meditation and its impact on depolarization and de-escalating hostility and hatred. But he has a project right now, this is the one funded by the Mind and Life Institute, which is we've been piloting a bunch of books, nonfiction books, to see, can reading do this? Is there ways that we can read the right materials in ways that can make us understand the world in a way that a bit deeper, that can make us open-minded and more willing to engage with people who are different than us? And so we're running studies on that right now, but we're trying to figure out what are the ways that you could do this, and then ideally, what are ways that are scalable? So you'll have to come back to me in about a year, we'll know that data. But I think this is, if I were to push the question to the audience, one of the gaps are things you said, how does it persist? Unfortunately, in the scientific literature I'm in psychology, the incentive structure to publish a paper is to publish something that works now in the lab. Yay! It's not really to follow up a month or a year later and see, does it still work? Those are expensive, time-consuming, and slow. And yet that is the stuff we need more. And so that's something we've been thinking about, is what are the durability of these things? Because we've been running these global intervention studies, for example, one led by my Romanian former postdoc, Madalina Vlasteanu, on climate change interventions. A lot of the interventions that are out there in the literature from the best labs, the best people, are really good at changing people's attitudes and beliefs, but not good at changing their actual behavior. And so we're going to have to incentivize more research that looks at changes in behavior if we want interventions that are going to work on behavior. So part of it is changing our incentive structures in our journals and our field, and tenure processes and hiring processes, so that it incentivizes people to do the work on things that are durable, affect real behavior or outcomes we care about, including policy, and are scalable. So that would be the big gap, I would say. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. There will be one last question, and Jay will also have a breakout this afternoon.
Yeah, I'll have a workshop, and then just grab me any other time if you have other questions.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I want to ask a question that brings together some of the presentations we've been hearing. I'm thinking about Dr. Valhart's work and Dr. Dasgupta's as well, around in groups. I do a lot of work around communal healing and racial ethnic identity. And I was struck by the research that shows that as soon as we create an in-group, we're also creating the potential for hatred or divisiveness toward an out-group. I'm thinking about your work with inclusive victimization narratives, where that doesn't necessarily have to spill over to hatred toward the other group, but it can be about preserving the in-group. And Dr. Dasgupta, I'm thinking about how you talked about the importance of expanding out and building relationships across groups. So I'm curious how you think about, you hinted at the end toward the benefits of identity. How can we, can we be rooted in the identities that really matter to us? Is that always correlated with potential for out-group hatred? How can we be rooted in who we are while still creating healthy communities across identities?
Thanks. Perfect question to end on. Okay. I'll say a couple things. So when people see this research, especially the work on minimal groups, it creates the perception that identities inevitably come with discrimination. Now, I'm so glad you asked me, because I want to debunk that. We wrote an Atlantic article on this when our book came out, called The Myth of Tribalism. Because when people see this, there's a lot of language of tribalism used as a metaphor to describe polarization. And I think there's utility. I talked about evolutionary origins of this. But tribalism implies that we're going to be at odds and hate another tribe. Now, identities can be inclusive. And it really fundamentally comes down to the norms. So there's 2 aspects here. The first aspect is, do you identify with the group? Once you identify with the group, and I'll say this maybe for a lot of people here are first-timers here, if you like this group, you look around and you say, what does it take to be a good group member? And you look to the people who are the leaders or the people who seem to be fitting in really well, and you start to emulate them. And so that means you're following the norms. And the norms are essentially the unwritten rules of behavior of a group. And those are how you get inclusion and get status within a group. And so if you look around this group, and I noticed it right away, and I noticed it even in the schedule pamphlet, there's a set of explicit norms about taking space and giving space and all of these things about like respecting other people, trying to find some common ground, even if you disagree. And I was really impressed by that because what they've tried to do is not just role model these things, but embed them in all kinds of aspects of the documentation. So if you're a first-time member of this community, you quickly see what the norms are. And the norms here are not discriminatory. In fact, I've only been here briefly, but I haven't seen anything remotely looks like that. Other environments are. Other groups have discriminatory norms or try to create them. And so there's lots of evidence that groups can be non-discriminatory, even at the national level, let's say national identity. People often, there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric in the United States right now and policies. And people link that to things like patriotism. But there's really fantastic work by a collaborator of mine, Alexandra Chahotska. And she analyzes what's called collective narcissism. And she finds, most people know narcissism is when you have an inflated sense of self. It's very fragile. Collective narcissism is when you have an inflated sense of your group, but it's really fragile and you're obsessed with dominating other groups. Now unfortunately, people who score high in collective narcissism, let's say at their country level, national narcissism, also tend to score high on like patriotism. But if you can pull those both out and compare them, national narcissism predicts anti-immigration attitudes, hostility towards other countries, and an obsession with the image of your group, even if you don't care about the welfare of the citizens of your group. Now, national patriotism, once you pull out the effects of narcissism, you are willing to engage with immigrants and bring them in, cooperate with other countries to find solutions that are international. You care about the welfare of every member of your group, in this case, a country. And so we have to understand these things are correlated, but they're opposites in terms of what they predict. And so when we often don't have language for what is a healthy form of patriotism. And there is a healthy form that a lot of people have. It's just you have to pull out the effects of national narcissism, and that exists in all kinds of groups, not just at the national level, of hostility, domination, exclusionary attitudes, or it can be like a positive identity. So I think what we all have a duty to do is all of us can affect the norms of a group. We can role model them. If someone violates them, we can step in and say, hey, that's just not how we do things here. So if you see someone being mistreated here, you should kind of pull the other person aside and say, listen, that's not how we do things here, and provide support to the person who got mistreated. And so that's how you cultivate a normative culture. And then other people might be like, and you see this effect on, for example, like racist or sexist jokes. A lot of people make racist or sexist jokes because they think it's funny. The moment they realize it's not funny, if no one laughs and says, actually, that's not cool, it dramatically decreases. Because people are doing it to fit in. And if they realize that's not a tool for fitting in, that's a tool for getting excluded, they won't do it as much. So this is like the ways in which norms affect our everyday behavior are really powerful. So you should think a lot about that in any group you're part of, creating healthy and inclusive norms. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jay.